November 20th, 2019. Joe here at Simple Life Show. Appreciate everybody for joining me today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, do all the good social media stuff. You find anything of value. So the impeachment inquiry has been going on for the last few weeks. I have not really been watching it as much. I caught the last few sessions here and there. I caught something yesterday. I really didn't watch it that much because, honestly, it was just too long and it was just pretty much the same thing going on and on and on. I think a lot of people are just getting kind of tired of it, Of course, everybody who is familiar with this channel knows that I am a Trump supporter. This is not going to be really anything about Trump or politics or anything like that, but it kind of will be. There was a bill that was just recently, it's not so much passed, it was approved. It's a bill that was approved. That's a lot of stuff that's been going around that people assume that cannabis now is legal at a federal level. That is not true. But there is some promising stuff that is going on. Now, Trump did promise at least once or twice that he would be looking at the situation before the end of the year, and I think this might have something to do with it. It's not something that's specifically all Trump or anything like that. There has been a lot of different Republican and Democrat Congress members and senators have brought this forward. I think Kamala Harris was one of them as well, that have been talking about trying to get cannabis deschedulized on a federal level and just taking it off the schedule of drugs. Of course, we all know that cannabis is not dangerous, and a lot of people have been ruined they've had their lives ruined because of this plant. I have had run-ins with the law as well. I've had to reap a lot of the negative consequences and stigmas that have come with it. Of course, cannabis has come a long way ever since it was criminalized. I would probably say that there's a lot of credibility to the argument that it has its racist roots as far as the criminalization of marijuana. This whole war on drugs type deal that's been going on for decades and decades really has not really produced much in the form of a reformed population. It hasn't really done much for society, but we will get into that here in a minute. So this House committee bill was approved, and so this was something that was in the makings for the last few weeks or so. Obviously it's been going on for years, but they finally have it approved. It's going to be going to the House to be voted on, of course, with a majority Democrat population in the House. It's a good chance that this is going to get passed. Let me actually put this on full desktop here. So we go through this bill here. Of course, this would be removing it from Schedule 1 of Controlled Substance Act and a few other things, including a 5% tax on cannabis products that would provide job training and legal assistance to those hit hardest by the war on drugs. It would also give more incentives to state to clear criminal records, though, of those with low-level marijuana offenses. Now, this would probably not do anything for people who are currently in jail for dealing in a large quantity of cannabis. Probably won't do anything for them. But this hasn't actually passed the House yet. It's suspected to. Now, of course, when it goes to the Senate, there's a lot of Republicans. Obviously, the Republicans hold the majority in the Senate. So what I suspect this will probably happen, there will be probably a lot of changes to this bill before it actually gets passed by the House, if it does. I mean, through the Senate, if it does. I know that Mitch McConnell, if you know anything about him, he's not my favorite person when it comes to the war on drugs, or especially cannabis, because he is completely anti-cannabis. If you've been paying attention to the news lately, you'll know that Joe Biden recently came out against marijuana, the legalization of marijuana. So I don't know if this is going to bode too well for his campaign, because there's a lot of millennials out there that like cannabis. They like marijuana. They like to smoke their weed. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I smoke it on a daily basis. If you've been listening to my podcast and stuff like that, you know that. I do it on a daily basis because I have pain. And if someone doesn't have pain, they want to smoke it, so what? Who cares? I think it's perfectly fine recreational drug. It's a lot safer than alcohol. It's a lot safer than cigarettes. You don't get addicted to it. physically. You do probably, I would probably assume that you would probably get some sort of psychological addiction to it. And that's, there's not any real science to back that up. But, I've heard people, and this is just, people talking about some of the, their type of dependence on certain things. You can always get a dependence on something. Doesn't matter what it is. People are addicted to gambling. They're addicted to a lot of stuff. Sometimes people are addicted to exercise and work and all this other type of stuff. So the whole word addiction is, it's kind of hard to really pinpoint what it is. Any kind of lines of demarcation between, physical addiction and mental addiction. So it's really hard to tell because it's, it's all happening in your mind anyway. But besides that point, of course, this has brought up a lot of spirited debate on the fact of whether cannabis should be legalized on a federal level. Now, even this bill would not legalize it. This would take it off to Schedule 1, and it would open up the states to make their own decisions, which we pretty much have now. The states can really make up their own minds on what they want to do when it comes to cannabis. And I don't think this is really going to change anything. However, for a lot of those states that are still, holding out as far as recreational, I think this will actually give them the final push that they need to legalize it on a recreational level. So I think that is a good thing. I think it's a good thing going forward. Now, I used to be a Democrat. I'm a Republican now, but this is something that I've never wavered on as far as marijuana. I didn't always use cannabis, but I've never been against it. Most of the people I know in my life have used cannabis, and they seem like they're perfectly well-adjusted people. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not going out there murdering people or stabbing people or robbing people just to get themselves a sack of weed. You do not see that in society. Now, there might be some one-off cases, but, we're talking about, the amount that you can actually count on your hand of those types of cases where people have done violent things on marijuana. But there's probably something else that's underlying there as well. People who have underlying psychiatric problems, maybe sometimes marijuana can conflict with that. I know that's a possibility, and that's if you're for the legalization of marijuana, you have to concede those types of things. But those are one-off situations, and we're talking about society as a whole. Has it benefited from the war on drugs, specifically cannabis? And I would be the first to say that no, it has not. As we can see that the number of arrests for drug offenses and minor offenses, only 5 were for serious offenses. So the majority, about half of the people that are in jail right now, around 50% of them are in there for nonviolent drug offenses. And a lot of them are there for marijuana. I mean, we shouldn't have anybody in jail for marijuana. Number one, it's a harmless substance. Okay. I understand there's some debate on the strength of the marijuana. Obviously, we live in a society where there's a lot of information out there as far as cannabis goes. And if you're a first-time user, you probably shouldn't be using concentrates. I mean, that's just kind of a no-brainer. And anybody that, if you go to an approved dispensary, they will probably tell you that. If they're actually really good at their job, they'll probably ask you some questions about, kind of what you're looking for, what your needs are, what your problems are, what you're trying to accomplish. Ask it if it's your first time. I've been in plenty of dispensaries. I used to live in Colorado, and that's one of the first things I've always looked for in a really great dispensary. It's not so much the quality of products, but actually how attentive the people are to my needs. Because not all weed and not all cannabis is, created equally. Not all forms of cannabis is created equally. It all has different uses, and sometimes people don't want to get high. Sometimes I just use CBD products alone. And in fact, the hemp market is growing at an exponential rate, and I know that's probably making a lot of people really nervous, but I'm not sure why. Cannabis is cannabis, hemp is hemp. It's all medicine, and it all has a lot of uses too as well. So we should all be really stoked and feel really good that the stigma of cannabis use and use in our society is really just kind of gone away. I know when I first started using cannabis, it was kind of a faux pas. It's something that you didn't want to tell other people, but now it's just a normal thing. The stigma has been removed, at least for the most part. Even public officials have been, admitted to using cannabis, and it's not a big deal. the whole did you inhale type of scenario is pretty much over now. But, it's just something that we kind of need to discuss further, and we need to have a little bit better of understanding. So there was something here just recently on CNBC where they had a person that was, discussing the pros and cons of marijuana legalization, and I'll go ahead and have you take a listen to that.
In fact, we've seen the dangerous experiment in prohibition play out, and we've seen that it's been totally ineffective in terms of reducing use across the board. It hasn't kept people safe in our communities. We know that it's time to shift to something else, and so now we have case studies of the states that have actually legalized that we can look at, and we know that in fact, in Colorado and in Washington, for example, DUI arrests have actually decreased since legalization, and youth use also has remained stable, if not decreased, among certain populations. So we can look at the data that we have available and then make some decisions about what makes sense in terms of framing overarching regulation for the country.
Is it too early because it's nearly impossible to test? If I pull you over and I'm a police officer and I think you're driving high, it's nearly impossible for me to actually do a test on the spot to determine whether or not you are high.
What we've seen is that the same drug recognition experts that do work with other substances where we also don't have tests are able to make determinations. They look and assess people's abilities cognitively. They look for other signs of impairment. They've been specially trained in this way, and we know that they can actually make this work.
Luke, do you agree? Do you think that, California and Colorado, for instance, have had pot legal for a long time now? We know what the implications are.
Oh, I think it's way too early to tell. We are only 6 years in. I'm here in Colorado. This is where I'm from. And being from Colorado, I can tell you that we've seen a massive industry take hold. That now, unfortunately, the United States Surgeon General is very concerned about what's happening. The United States Surgeon General just released the first ever advisory on marijuana for the U.S. Surgeon General in 40 years. And it's all has to do with the fact that, as he said, this is no longer your mother's marijuana. The 3% potency THC joints of the 70s are now 99% potency concentrates. And they come also in the shape of gummies and candies. So we're, of course, seeing youth rise, which is what the Surgeon General said. Youth use rise. We're also seeing pregnant mothers using at the most alarming rate this country has ever seen. We are moving way too fast right now. We're 6 years in. We should be looking at what the harms have been of this, looking at the data, and making sure that we really get this right. Because at the end of the day, legalization is not about throwing some kid in jail over a joint. We should not be doing that. But what this really is about a massive industry that wants to make money. Now, Big Tobacco told us their cigarettes are medicine. We now have pharma companies that tell us that their opioids are medicine, and they're being prosecuted. I think we're looking at big marijuana being a major subject of some serious lawsuits for all these medical claims here in just the next couple of years. We really need to be careful.
Why not go slower, Melissa? Why the rush?
It's really clear that prohibition has been incredibly damaging to communities. We know that over and over again this has been the case. 400,000 people in 2017 across the country were arrested for marijuana. So as Luke is talking about the fact that this isn't affecting people very much, we don't want people, young children especially, teenagers, having their lives upended and being thrown in jail. That's absolutely not the case in terms of what our country is doing right now, and it's time to
legalize or
recognize that.
decriminalize other Schedule I narcotics?
Yeah, that's the point here, is we can just decriminalize this so that youth and these communities that have been very much harmed by the war on drugs, that they are no longer arrested, which is exactly what New York State did.
Actually work. New York State in 1977 decriminalized marijuana, and yet still was the marijuana arrest capital of the country throughout that entire time. We had 800,000 arrests here in New York, where I work. So we know that decriminalization hasn't been effective.
To decriminalize it
and that doesn't go far enough and won't actually fix the problem.
And it overwhelmingly rejected recreational marijuana legalization.
You guys are talking at the same time. Sorry, Luke, go first, and then Melissa, go.
Yeah, so New York rejected recreational legalization in favor of decriminalization because they didn't want to let big tobacco and big pharma and all these major drug industries now that unfortunately have taken over states like mine, Colorado, that chose to allow marijuana legalization. They didn't want that in New York. New Jersey rejected it, Connecticut rejected it, and a lot of it was by members of the Black Caucus, members of the NAACP,
that is 100%
members
not
of social
true in New
justice
York.
groups who do not want that. So that's really what I think the big concern is that this industry industry is trying to make social justice a profit ploy. They're trying to make billions of dollars off the backs of minority communities, which is exactly where they're putting all the pot shops in Colorado. There's a pot shop for every 42 residents of color in Denver City, and I think that personally is disgusting. And anyone who wants to make a profit off of our low-income minority communities, I don't think they should be allowed to do that. So we really need to be careful about what we're talking about when it comes to legalization.
Yeah, that's a mischaracterization across many, many fronts there that we probably don't have time to get into here. Would encourage folks to really dive in and find the answers for yourself at smart-ny.com.
Please do. It's all in the research and the
But what happened
facts.
in New York was actually that people were debating where the tax revenue should be reinvested and looking at how we can make sure that the communities that have been the most harmed by prohibition are actually.
Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and pause that video. It's pretty much over now. So what they're really discussing, I mean, obviously this is not, something that really needs to be explained, is there is obviously there's going to be a pushback on the legalization of marijuana as far as on a federal level, because you could say there's probably interest in mind as far as for big alcohol and big tobacco. I just really think that we need to have a better understanding of what real freedom is. And, the states, the federal government really shouldn't be involved in all this kind of stuff as far as making substances illegal. I think it should always be in the hands of the states. That is really what the Constitution is there for. The federal government really isn't there to decide what is legal and what's not, besides, the big things like murder and rape and robbery and all that kind of stuff. I mean, those are obvious things, but we're talking about substance abuse. This is a health issue. It should never be a criminal issue. So if you were listening there, we kind of got a little bit of a taste of where this is all leading, at least eventually where this is going to be leading. And this is probably going to be leading to an all-out legalization of all drugs. Now, I don't think that the majority of people are on this train yet. I think that it's gaining steam, but I don't think that we're all there yet. I don't even know if I'm there yet. I mean, we've all seen the photos of the person that was healthy and then they got on meth and all that stuff, or we've seen the images of people that are on crack and all this other kind of stuff. And yeah, it's very concerning. It's a health issue, just like pretty much anything else. It's like obesity. There is a huge obesity problem in this country. Now, should we be adding on to these problems that we already have? Obesity, addiction to cigarettes and nicotine, addiction to alcohol, and all this other kind of stuff. We have so many vices already that we're battling. Should we add on to that? That's a double-edged sword, because we have freedom. But do we have absolute freedom? I think that if we have absolute freedom and we want to go down that road of absolute freedom, then yes, I think we should legalize all drugs. And when I say legalize all drugs, there's different spectrums of that. There's some people that are calling for the government to basically manufacture heroin and cocaine and all this other stuff and make it cheap for everybody. Now, this is I have a problem with that. Number one, the federal government shouldn't be even producing marijuana to begin with. Now, there is one university that I believe that gets government funding for the research of marijuana. They can research it all they want. That's perfectly fine. They can get government grants for that. However, the government should not be producing marijuana at any cost. That should be in the hands of the people and the states in general. The state should be basically setting out their legal structure for that. And people should be applying for permits, and it should be regulated as far as for the safety of the product. I do not agree. Now, as far as cannabis goes, that's perfectly fine. And for other drugs like heroin and crack, cocaine, meth, all that kind of stuff, I just do not agree with that. It's not that I don't believe that people should have ultimate freedom to do whatever they wish, but I don't think that the government needs to get involved in actually making a situation that's already bad even worse. I don't think that we should be producing the drugs here just so we can actually make it cheaper. This is a common debate tactic. It's a common argument that actually comes up when we're talking about the legalization of all drugs. Yes, if the government got involved and started producing it, yeah, that would probably dry up a lot of the demand. But guess what? There would actually be more people probably using this drug because, number one, it's going to be more readily accessible and it's going to be cheaper. I'm not saying that a lot of the drugs out there aren't already cheap, But, just like any other type of economy, the prices go up and down and so forth. But when you're addicted, people really don't care as much. They will do whatever they can to get their hands on these substances because they are addicted to them. So, when it really comes to freedom, should we allow the freedom for people to do what they wish? Yes. Should we be emboldening people to do that? Should we be facilitating that vice? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That's why there's Surgeon General warnings against smoking, Surgeon General warnings against using alcohol. If you ask the federal government if it was an entity or a person and whether it wanted people to use any types of drugs, that entity would say no, because there's obviously negative consequences. There's going to be impacts in the productivity of people. There's going to be impacts of the health of people, which is going to cost more money. There's going to be people that end up killing themselves on these substances, and we don't need that either. However, what I do believe we should do is decriminalize all drugs. I think that getting into the middle ground is usually where the meat of all truth lies. And I think that whether you're far left or far right, I think you're living in no man's land. Just as crazy as some of the liberal lunatics out there, there's just as many crazy right-wing conspiracy theorists and stuff like that as well. I think that we need to look at the middle of everything to get the really heart and the truth of what's going on. So Portugal, it has been in the news on and off. Of course, they have legalized all drugs. Now, when I say legalized all drugs, I'm not saying they produced the drugs either. They just decriminalized it. So I'm going to go ahead and play this video here for you now, and we'll talk about it in a second.
Back in the 1990s, Portugal faced a heroin crisis. 1 in 100 people were using the drug. It took something drastic to turn things around. Here's how Portugal kicked the habit. While the Western world experienced the social and cultural revolution of the 60s, Portugal was kept isolated by the dictator Antonio Salazar. In 1974, the Carnation Revolution overthrew his oppressive Estado Novo regime, and the Portuguese people were suddenly exposed to newfound freedoms.
Censorship was at an end, freedom of speech restored, elections promised, and most important of all, the end of Portugal's colonial wars in Africa.
This was the catalyst that would lead to Portugal's problem. Attitudes towards drugs and experimentation were relaxed. At the same time, the population grew, with up to 1 million people arriving from the colonies, just as the country fell into a severe economic depression. As if on cue, cheap heroin from Afghanistan and Pakistan flooded Europe. While most countries had experienced fighting drugs, the new liberal Portugal wasn't prepared. By the 90s, an estimated 1% of the population was using heroin.
It was almost impossible to find a single family in Portugal that had no problems connected to drugs.
Dr. João Goulão formed part of a team of healthcare professionals to rethink how Portugal dealt with drugs. Feeling like they had nothing to lose, their solution was radical. On July 1st, 2001, Portugal became the first country in the world to decriminalize all drugs. What that means is while they remain illegal, possessing small amounts of anything from cannabis to cocaine or even heroin doesn't result in arrest. Users aren't considered as criminals, but rather treated as patients in a health-first approach. Instead of facing a judge, they meet a dissuasion panel made up of lawyers, social workers and medics. Before decriminalisation, around 90% of funds spent on fighting drugs went on enforcement and just 10% on healthcare. After 2001, that was reversed. Critics claim the change in law might encourage users and even attract drug tourists, and there is some evidence that suggests small increases in reported drug use. But advocates of decriminalisation say that drug users are more likely to find help if they know they won't be locked up. The number of Portuguese in rehab programs rose from just over 6,000 in 1999 to nearly 26,000 in 2008. While those using heroin has fallen from about 100,000 to around 50,000 today, and drug-related deaths have fallen dramatically. In 2015, Portugal had just 6 deaths per million people, the lowest in Western Europe, and a tiny fraction of that in the US. The numbers show just how remarkable Portugal's turnaround has been. Due to its geography, it serves as a gateway for trafficking into Europe, so stamping out drugs just isn't realistic. Instead, it's shown that a humane and health-led approach can be much less damaging to society.
So yeah, that was a really good video on the situation in Portugal there. And my personal thoughts about this, if you really kind of were paying attention to that, is that, you know, they focus more on the health of the population and then putting people behind bars because they are addicted to something. Like I said, being addicted to something should not be illegal. Selling substances that get people addicted should still be illegal. Yes, I will probably not sway from that, even though I know there's legitimate arguments for the legalization of all drugs. I think that all drugs should be decriminalized, and I think that we need to spend more money and diverting all this money from this war on drugs over to actually making the population healthier. And not only that, but also diverting more money into more social programs for people who are addicted to drugs to help them get back on their feet and also be a productive member of society. This is something that's only going to benefit society, and I think this is something that we can all get behind. And if they put something like that in a bill together, I don't think that anytime soon that would be something that would happen. I think it's simply just too radical right now. I know that there's a lot of old horses as far as the Republicans, and I'm a Republican myself, but I think there's a lot of holdouts in the Republican Party that are simply not going to be on board with this. I think that's going to quickly change over time. I think that's going to be something that we're going to see become a reality. Of course, it is almost 2020 now. We should be having flying cars, but we don't have that yet either. So this is just something that we need to kind of wait on and kind of, you know, go about our daily living. But the whole war on drugs is coming to an end. That is rest assured because of all of this, all these states that are going down like dominoes when it comes to the legalization of cannabis. Like I said, but there is a huge movement going on right now for just getting rid of all of the criminalization of drugs, which I completely agree with. Should the government be involved in manufacturing the drugs? Absolutely not. I don't think I'll ever change my stance on that. I don't think the government should be involved in any of that. I don't think that we should make it readily available either. But the more that we focus on my main point and my main argument here, and I'll end with this, is when people are addicted to drugs and they get arrested, then they are entered into a system. And once they are in that system, it's really hard to get out. Once you have tasted the judicial system, it's really hard to get that out of your mouth. And it follows you around for the rest of your life, no matter how small or how big it is. It can find you. And it makes it hard to find work, and it makes it hard to do a lot of different things, even get loans. A lot of the stuff follows you around. Your record really does follow you around. We should be eliminating that as a source of disparity for a lot of people, not just the Black community and the Hispanic community, but all people that have been affected by this. We should not be locking people up for any of this stuff. If they are truly addicted to drugs, I guarantee you this, that if we decriminalize this stuff, yes, you will probably see a little bit more people trying drugs if it's not illegal. But if it's decriminalized, I think you're going to see a lot of people coming forward, especially if there's more money flowing in to helping getting people off of these substances. If we make it free to get help, then I guarantee you that we will see a large decrease in the amount of hard drug users. And of course, that will help dry up the demand for a lot of these drugs from across the border and overseas and so much. So, tell me what you think. Should all drugs be legal no matter what, and we should just live in a completely free society to do whatever we wish? It's I'm kind of stuck in the middle. You know, I'm really I think it should be decriminalized, but the government should stay out of it. I don't think the government should be promoting anything that's going to harm our bodies. So until next time, this is Joe with Simple Life. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.